The story of medieval England is one of conquest, kingship, faith, and transformation. Spanning more than 4 centuries, this era shaped the nation's identity in profound ways. It was a time of monumental events: the Norman invasion, the signing of the Magna Carta, and the devastating Black Death. Castles rose across the countryside, markets bustled in growing towns, and great cathedrals soared toward the heavens. Yet, beneath the pageantry and stone walls, the daily lives of peasants, merchants, and nobles unfolded in a world bound by tradition, faith, and the rigid structure of feudal society. The medieval period in England began with blood and ambition. In 1066, the Battle of Hastings changed the course of history forever. William, Duke of Normandy, defeated King Harold VI and claimed the English crown, ushering in a new ruling class. Over the centuries that followed, kings would rise and fall, rebellions would shake the realm, and the lives of ordinary people would evolve in ways they could scarcely have imagined. The medieval age was a tapestry woven from war, religion, politics, and the resilience of those who lived through it. It was also a time of extraordinary contrasts. While nobles feasted in great halls beneath glittering banners, peasants labored in the fields from dawn to dusk. Knights clad in armor rode to battle, bound by chivalric codes, while humble craftsmen worked at their benches, shaping goods for local markets. The church held immense sway over every soul, guiding not only religious life but also politics, education, and culture. The rhythms of the year were dictated by the seasons, the demands of farming, and the liturgical calendar. This is the story of medieval England, not just of kings and wars, but of the people who lived, loved, fought, and endured. It begins with the Norman conquest, a moment that would forever alter England's language, laws, architecture, and society. The centuries that followed would see the blending of cultures, the birth of new political institutions, and the slow transformation of a medieval world into the beginnings of the modern age. The medieval era in England truly began with the Norman conquest. On October 14, 1066, the Battle of Hastings decided the fate of the kingdom. William, Duke of Normandy, claimed victory over King Harold II, whose death marked the end of Anglo-Saxon rule. With this triumph, William became William Fern of England, known to history as William the Conqueror. His reign would fundamentally reshape England's political, cultural, and social landscape. William's control of England was not merely a matter of taking the crown. It required a complete reorganization of the kingdom's governance. He introduced the feudal system, a hierarchical structure where land was granted to loyal nobles in exchange for military service. These nobles, in turn, oversaw the peasants and serfs who worked the land. This system ensured loyalty to the king and created a network of power that bound the realm together under Norman rule. The Normans also brought a new architectural vision to England. Stone castles replaced the wooden fortifications of the Anglo-Saxons, serving both as military strongholds and symbols of Norman dominance. The Tower of London, begun by William himself, stood as a powerful reminder of his authority. Across the countryside, Motte and Bailey castles rose, securing Norman control over newly conquered territories. Language and culture were also transformed. French became the language of the court, the nobility and legal proceedings, while the common people continued to speak Old English. Over time, the two languages blended, giving birth to Middle English, a linguistic evolution that would profoundly influence English literature and identity. The Normans brought their own customs, fashions, and laws, integrating them into the fabric of English life. William's administration was famously meticulous. In 1086, he commissioned the Domesday Book, a vast survey of England's lands, resources, and population. This extraordinary record provided the Crown with detailed information for taxation and governance, reflecting a level of centralized control unprecedented in England's history. It remains one of the most valuable historical documents from the medieval period. The early Norman kings faced constant challenges to their rule. Rebellions by Anglo-Saxon nobles, Welsh and Scottish incursions, and disputes among William's own family tested the strength of the new dynasty. Yet, through a combination of military force, strategic marriages, and political cunning, the Normans maintained their hold on England. Their influence extended across the Channel, as the kings of England also ruled vast territories in France. After William's death in 1087, the throne passed to his son, William II, known as William Rufus. His reign was marked by conflict with the Church and ongoing military campaigns in Normandy and Wales. William II's sudden death in 1100, under mysterious circumstances during a hunting trip, brought his younger brother, Henry I, to power. Henry proved a shrewd and capable ruler, strengthening royal authority and codifying laws in the Charter of Liberties, an early attempt to limit the Crown's arbitrary power. Henry I's reign also saw the promotion of learning and administrative efficiency. He encouraged the use of written records in governance and expanded the royal justice system. However, his later years were overshadowed by the death of his only legitimate son, William Adelin, in the sinking of the White Ship in 1185, This tragedy set the stage for a succession crisis that would plunge England into turmoil. When Henry III died in 1135, he left the throne to his daughter, Empress Matilda. However, her claim was contested by her cousin Stephen of Blois, leading to a civil war known as the Anarchy. For nearly 2 decades, England was ravaged by conflict as rival factions vied for the crown. Castles were seized and lost, alliances shifted, and ordinary people suffered under the strain of lawlessness and instability. The anarchy eventually came to an end in 1153 with the Treaty of Wallingford, which recognized Stephen as king but named Matilda's son, Henry of Anjou, as his heir. When Stephen died the following year, Henry ascended the throne as Henry II, marking the beginning of the powerful Plantagenet dynasty. With him, England entered a new chapter in its medieval history, one defined by legal reform, imperial ambition, and renewed conflict with the Church. The dawn of medieval England was a period of profound change. The Norman conquest had transformed the nation's ruling elite, reshaped its institutions, and altered its culture. The political instability that followed tested the resilience of the monarchy, but also laid the foundations for the kingdom's future. By the mid-12th century, England was poised to become a significant power in Europe, guided by a dynasty that would rule for centuries. Feudalism formed the backbone of medieval English society. It was not just a political system, but a social order that dictated how land, labor, and loyalty were exchanged. Every person had a place, and every place had duties, from the monarch down to the humblest serf in the village. At the top of the hierarchy stood the king. He was considered the owner of all the land in the realm, granting portions to nobles in return for military service and loyalty. This bond between ruler and vassal was sealed by oaths, making feudal obligations both legal and sacred in nature. Beneath the king were the great lords and barons. These powerful nobles controlled vast estates, collecting taxes, maintaining private armies, and serving as the king's advisors. Their loyalty was essential for political stability, but their power also made them potential rivals to the throne in times of political unrest. Knights formed the military backbone of the system. Sworn to serve their lords, they defended lands from invaders, upheld justice in local disputes, and embodied the ideals of chivalry. In return for service, knights were often granted small parcels of land, known as fiefs, to support themselves and their households. Below the knights were the free tenants. Unlike serfs, these men rented their land for a set payment rather than labor service. They enjoyed more personal freedom, could move between manors, and often engaged in trade or specialized crafts, playing a vital role in the local economy's growth. At the very bottom were the serfs, peasants bound to the land they worked. They could not leave the manor without permission and owed the lord labor on his fields. In exchange, they were granted small plots to farm for their own families, ensuring their subsistence. The manor was the center of feudal life. It was both an economic hub and a community, complete with fields, pastures, mills, and sometimes even a small church. The lord's manor house served as a symbol of authority and the place where disputes were judged and rents collected. Lords provided protection in exchange for service. In times of war, they offered refuge within their fortified homes. In peacetime, they acted as arbiters of justice, settling disputes and enforcing laws according to both royal decree and local customs passed down for generations. The system was deeply intertwined with the church. Bishops and abbots often held lands under the king, functioning as lords in their own right. They collected rents, managed agricultural production, and provided spiritual guidance, making religion an inseparable part of both governance and daily medieval life. Feudalism also created obligations beyond the battlefield. Lords might be called to the king's court to offer counsel or participate in great councils. These gatherings not only decided matters of war and peace, but also helped shape the legal and administrative foundations of the kingdom. The structure ensured stability, but also reinforced inequality. Social mobility was rare, and one's birth largely determined their fate. However, loyalty in times of war, marriage alliances, or royal favor could occasionally elevate a family's standing, showing that opportunity existed, though it was exceedingly rare. The rights of peasants were limited, yet they were not entirely powerless. Many villages negotiated charters, granting them certain freedoms in exchange for taxes. These agreements could reduce labor obligations and grant greater autonomy, especially in regions where towns and markets were beginning to flourish. Markets played a growing role in feudal society. While most peasants produced goods for subsistence, surplus produce could be sold or traded. Lords often encouraged market activity on their lands, as it brought in revenue through tolls and taxes while fostering a more connected regional economy. The feudal system was enforced by custom as much as by law. Centuries-old traditions dictated everything from how oaths were sworn to how disputes were resolved. These customs, often unwritten, shaped daily interactions and ensured that everyone understood their role and responsibilities in society. Castles were both military strongholds and symbols of authority. They reinforced a lord's control over his lands, served as administrative centers, and intimidated would-be rebels. Their presence in a region signaled both the strength of feudal power and the protection it promised to loyal subjects. Knights, though warriors, were also bound by the chivalric code. They were expected to protect the weak, defend the faith, and show loyalty to their lord. While the reality often fell short of the ideal, the code influenced literature, art, and the image of knighthood for centuries. Peasant labor underpinned the entire system. Without their work in the fields, no lord could maintain his wealth or fulfill his obligations to the king. Harvest failures, disease, or rebellion among peasants could destabilize even the most powerful nobles' rule, showing their indispensable yet undervalued role. Feudal justice was local and often personal. Lords presided over manorial courts, where disputes between tenants were heard. Punishments ranged from fines to public shaming, and the decisions reinforced the social hierarchy by reminding everyone of the lord's ultimate authority within his domain. Over time, money began to alter feudal relationships. Some lords accepted cash payments instead of military service, allowing them to hire professional soldiers. This shift weakened traditional bonds of loyalty and hinted at the eventual decline of the strict feudal order in favor of more flexible systems. The Church reinforced the hierarchy by preaching obedience and divine order. It taught that each person's station was ordained by God, discouraging rebellion while offering the hope of salvation. This spiritual framework gave feudalism moral legitimacy in the eyes of both nobles and commoners. Marriage alliances were a key tool of feudal politics. Nobles married their children into other influential families to secure alliances, merge lands, or resolve disputes. These unions could dramatically reshape the political map without a single sword being drawn, showing the power of family strategy in medieval England. Feudalism thrived on loyalty, but it also bred tension. Rivalries between lords, disputes over land boundaries, or contested inheritances could erupt into violence. In such cases, the king's role as mediator was crucial in preventing local conflicts from escalating into widespread unrest. Despite its rigidness, the system adapted over time. Royal reforms, the growth of towns, and changing military tactics slowly eroded the old structures. Yet for centuries, feudalism remained the defining feature of medieval English life, shaping politics, economy, and society in profound ways. The decline of feudalism would not come overnight. Even as its foundations weakened, many lords clung to their privileges, resisting change. But the seeds of transformation, commerce, central governance, and peasant resistance were already taking root, signaling the eventual end of the old order. Feudalism left a lasting legacy in England's laws, customs, and land-holding patterns. Many modern traditions, from legal oaths to property rights, have roots in the medieval system. Though centuries have passed, the echoes of feudal society still resonate in the cultural memory of the nation. Medieval England's society was rigidly hierarchical, with the king at the top, followed by nobles, knights, clergy, and peasants. Social mobility was limited, and birth determined one's opportunities. Daily life revolved around land, religion, and survival, with stark differences between the comforts of the wealthy and the hardships of the poor. In rural villages, peasants formed the bulk of the population. They worked long hours farming fields, tending livestock, and paying taxes or labor services to their lord. Life was simple and labor-intensive, with seasonal rhythms dictating planting, harvesting, and rest. Most peasants lived in modest thatched cottages with dirt floors. The nobility enjoyed privileges and wealth unimaginable to common folk. They lived in stone manor houses or castles, attended by servants, and dined on meats, fine breads, and imported spices. Leisure included hunting, falconry, and feasting. Their lifestyles were funded by rents and produce collected from their lands and tenants. Knights held an important role, bound by the code of chivalry. They served their lords in battle, upheld justice, and displayed martial skill in tournaments. Their armor, horses, and training required significant resources, meaning knighthood was reserved for the wealthy. Knights also held land, which peasants farmed in exchange for protection. The clergy wielded immense influence in medieval England. From village priests to bishops in cathedrals, they guided spiritual life and enforced church teachings. Monasteries were centers of learning, charity, and manuscript production. For many, the church was the heart of community life, marking births, marriages, and deaths with ritual and ceremony. Life expectancy was short, often under 40 years, due to disease, poor diet, and harsh working conditions. The Black Death in the 14th century devastated communities, killing nearly half the population. This disaster reshaped society as labor shortages gave surviving peasants more bargaining power and sometimes improved living conditions. Clothing revealed social status instantly. Nobles wore fine wool, silk, and fur, dyed in rich colors like crimson and deep blue. Sumptuary laws restricted peasants to coarse wool and linen, often in natural shades. Accessories, jewelry, and embroidery further signaled wealth, making fashion an important expression of rank and identity. Food varied sharply between classes. Peasants relied on bread, pottage, and vegetables, with meat reserved for special occasions. Nobles enjoyed beef, venison, swan, and exotic imports like sugar and almonds. Preservation methods included salting, smoking, and pickling. Meals were social events, with feasts showcasing generosity, wealth, and connections to distant trade routes. Education was rare outside the clergy and nobility. Most peasants were illiterate, passing knowledge orally. Noble children learned reading, writing, and courtly manners, while boys might train as pages or squires. Monastic schools taught Latin and religious studies, laying foundations for England's intellectual life and the preservation of classical knowledge. Villages were tight-knit communities where cooperation was essential. Collective farming, shared grazing lands, and mutual aid during harvest or building projects bound people together. Disputes were settled at the manor court, presided over by the local lord or his steward, blending practical justice with the reinforcement of feudal authority. Towns offered opportunities beyond rural life, though they were small by modern standards. Merchants, craftsmen, and laborers lived in bustling streets of timber-framed houses. Guilds regulated trades, set quality standards, and provided support for members. Markets and fairs connected towns to the countryside, enabling the exchange of goods, news, and ideas. Entertainment varied by class. Nobles attended banquets, dances, and jousts, while peasants enjoyed village festivals, storytelling, and games like wrestling or archery. Religious holidays provided breaks from labor, often blending Christian rituals with older seasonal celebrations. Music, both sacred and secular, filled halls and taverns, carried by traveling minstrels and musicians. Healthcare was rudimentary, relying on herbal remedies, charms, and limited surgical techniques. Physicians served the wealthy, while most relied on local healers or monks. Illness was often explained through religious belief, with prayer and penance seen as paths to recovery. Plagues and injuries were constant threats in every social class. Religion shaped daily routines profoundly. The church calendar dictated fasting, feasting, and festivals. Parish attendance was mandatory, and tithes supported clergy and upkeep. Religious teachings influenced moral behavior, lawmaking, and community cohesion, while fear of sin and hope for salvation underscored decisions from marriage to work to warfare. Gender roles were strictly defined. Men dominated public and legal life, while women managed households, raised children, and contributed to farming or crafts. Noble women could wield influence through marriage alliances, land ownership, or as regents, but most women's opportunities were limited. The convent offered an alternative life of devotion and service. Children's lives were shaped by their family's status. Noble boys trained for knighthood or clerical life, while girls learned domestic skills or were married strategically. Peasant children worked from a young age, tending animals, fetching water, or helping in fields. Play existed, but survival needs often came first. Hygiene was minimal by modern standards. Bathing was infrequent, partly due to the labor of heating water. Clothes were worn repeatedly before washing. Streets in towns could be foul with waste, contributing to disease spread. Wealthy households had access to more private washing facilities, but sanitation was a challenge everywhere. Festivals and holy days punctuated the year, offering respite from labor. Events like Christmas, Easter, and harvest festivals blended religious observance with communal feasting, dancing, and games. These gatherings reinforced social bonds, allowed courtships, and reminded people of the cyclical rhythms that governed both work and worship. Travel was limited for most, though pilgrims often journeyed to holy sites like Canterbury. Nobles traveled for political and military reasons, while merchants moved goods along trade routes. Roads were often rough, making river travel preferable where possible. Inns and monasteries offered shelter to travelers, bridging distant communities. Justice was localized and often harsh. Crimes like theft could lead to whipping, branding, or execution. Trial by jury was emerging, but ordeal by fire or water still appeared. Nobles sometimes received more lenient treatment, reflecting the inequality built into the legal and social systems of medieval England. Art and craftsmanship flourished despite hardships. Churches showcased stained glass, sculptures, and illuminated manuscripts. Skilled artisans produced fine metalwork, textiles, and pottery, blending utility with beauty. Nobles commissioned works to display wealth and piety, while guilds promoted skill and innovation. Even simple tools reflected the ingenuity of medieval craftspeople. Music filled many aspects of life. The church cultivated sacred chants and hymns, while secular music included love songs, ballads, and lively dances. Instruments like lutes, harps, and drums accompanied performances. Music was not merely entertainment. It carried stories, preserved history, and connected communities across generations. Weather dictated work and leisure. Harsh winters tested survival, while good harvests meant abundance and celebration. Droughts or floods could devastate crops, leading to hunger. Nobles were better shielded from nature's extremes, but no one was entirely immune to the climate's power over medieval life. Architecture reflected function and status. Castles provided defense and comfort for nobles, while timber-framed houses filled towns. Churches dominated skylines, symbolizing faith's central role. Peasant cottages were simple but practical, often shared with animals for warmth. Building styles adapted to available materials and the needs of daily survival. Sports and games provided leisure and skill building. Archery was both entertainment and a military necessity. Football, in its rough early form, could involve whole villages. Board games like chess spread among the nobility, teaching strategy and patience. Play, though brief, was essential for morale in a labor-heavy world. Work defined most people's lives. From dawn until dusk, peasants toiled in fields, nobles managed estates, and craftsmen honed their trades. The agricultural calendar dictated tasks, with seasonal festivals marking transitions. Labor was physically demanding, but it provided the foundation for the wealth and stability of the medieval realm. Trade brought variety and connection. Local markets supplied essentials, while imported goods from Europe and beyond added luxury. Cloth from Flanders, spices from the East, and wine from France reached England's ports. These exchanges fostered cultural contact and economic growth, linking villages to the wider medieval world. The feudal system structured obligations. Peasants owed labor or rent to lords, who provided protection and justice. Knights served militarily, while nobles pledged loyalty to the king. This web of duties created stability, but also entrenched inequality, defining medieval society's rigid but interdependent nature. Superstition blended with religion in daily beliefs. Omens, charms, and folk magic influenced decisions about health, crops, and marriage. Medieval England's economy was largely agrarian, with most people relying on the land for survival. Fields, pastures, and meadows shaped daily life, determining what could be grown and when work was done. The open field system was common, with large communal fields divided into strips for families. Cooperation was essential, as plowing, planting, and harvesting were shared tasks among villagers. In rural villages, peasants owed rent or labor services to their lord. This could mean working the lord's domain land, repairing roads, or providing goods, creating a deeply interconnected local economy. Livestock played a crucial role in medieval farming. Cows provided milk, sheep offered wool, and pigs supplied meat. Animals also helped with plowing and fertilizing fields, increasing yields for subsistence farming. Seasons dictated the rhythm of agricultural work. Spring planting, summer maintenance, and autumn harvesting kept peasants constantly active, while winter allowed time for repairs, tool-making, and preparation for the next cycle. Grain, particularly wheat, barley, and rye, was the foundation of medieval diets. Bread varied by social status, with finer white bread for the wealthy and coarse rye bread for poorer villagers. Famine was an ever-present threat in medieval England. Poor harvests caused by bad weather, pests, or war could devastate communities, leading to hunger, disease, and social unrest. Markets and fairs allowed peasants to trade surplus goods, buy necessities, and connect with wider trade networks. These events also provided social interaction and entertainment beyond daily rural life. Monasteries were important centers of agricultural production and innovation. Monks experimented with farming techniques, managed large estates, and provided food for the needy, influencing rural economies significantly. Tithes, a form of tax to the church, required peasants to give a tenth of their produce. This supported religious institutions, but also added another burden on struggling farmers. The Black Death in the 14th century devastated the workforce. With fewer laborers, surviving peasants could demand better wages and conditions, shifting the balance between lords and workers. Wool production became England's most valuable export. The demand for fine wool in Europe spurred sheep farming, enriching some landlords but sometimes reducing available farmland for growing crops. The manorial system structured medieval rural life. Lords controlled the land, peasants worked it, and the manor court settled disputes, reinforcing social order and economic stability. Fishing supplemented rural diets, especially in coastal and river areas. Salted or smoked fish was a staple during Lent and other fasting periods when meat consumption was restricted by the church. Woodland areas were vital resources, providing fuel, building materials, nuts, berries, and grazing for pigs. Forest laws, however, often restricted commoners' rights, preserving hunting grounds for the nobility. Water mills and windmills revolutionized grain processing. By mechanizing the grinding of flour, they saved time and labor, boosting productivity and supporting growing medieval communities. Tenant farming allowed some peasants to rent land for fixed payments rather than labor services. This offered more independence, though the ability to profit varied greatly depending on harvests. Agricultural tools were simple but effective. Wooden plows, sickles, and scythes remained common for centuries, with innovations arriving slowly and often resisted due to tradition or cost. Weather was the greatest uncertainty in farming. Drought, floods, or unseasonal frosts could wipe out crops, forcing communities to rely on stored grain or outside aid. Cottages were modest, with wattle and daub walls, thatched roofs, and earthen floors. These homes were practical for rural life, but offered little comfort compared to wealthier households. Communal grazing lands, called commons, were essential for poorer villagers who owned few animals. Access to commons could determine whether a family thrived or struggled through winter. Horses were less common than oxen for plowing due to their cost. However, wealthier farmers used them for faster, more efficient work, especially in lighter soils. Rural trade relied on barter as much as coin. Peasants exchanged produce, labor, and goods like cloth or tools, creating an economy based on mutual dependence. Beekeeping provided honey, the main sweetener of the time, and beeswax for candles. This was a valuable side industry for rural households with the right conditions. Peasants often brewed their own ale, both for personal use and local sale. Ale was safer to drink than untreated water and became a staple of rural diets. Medieval towns in England were bustling centers of trade, craft, and governance. They offered opportunities beyond farming, drawing merchants, artisans, and laborers seeking livelihoods within growing urban communities. Town charters granted privileges like self-governance, market rights, and tax freedoms. These charters attracted settlers, increasing economic activity and solidifying the town's independence from feudal lords. Markets were the lifeblood of towns, held weekly in central squares. Farmers, craftsmen, and traders sold goods ranging from food and cloth to imported luxuries, fostering economic exchange. Craft guilds controlled trades, regulating quality, prices, and apprenticeships. They protected members' interests, ensured fair competition, and maintained high standards in industries like weaving, blacksmithing, and shoemaking. Apprenticeship was the pathway into skilled trades. Young boys, and sometimes girls, learned a craft under a master for years before earning wages or establishing their own workshops. Townhouses varied by wealth. Wealthier merchants built multi-story timber homes, while poorer residents lived in small, crowded dwellings, often sharing space with animals or workshops. Sanitation was a constant challenge. Waste often flowed into open drains, attracting pests and spreading disease. The lack of clean water made towns vulnerable to epidemics. Churches were prominent landmarks in towns. Beyond religious services, they hosted meetings, offered charity, and influenced community life, reinforcing the church's central role in urban society. Taverns and alehouses were social hubs where townsfolk gathered to drink, talk, and exchange news. They played a vital role in community bonding and business networking. Medieval fairs drew visitors from far and wide, offering exotic goods, entertainment, and opportunities for large-scale trade. These events boosted local economies and strengthened commercial ties. Urban crime was a concern. Pickpocketing, burglary, and fraud were common, prompting towns to appoint watchmen or establish curfews to maintain order and protect merchants. Markets sold imported goods like spices, silk, and wine alongside local produce. Such items reflected growing connections between English towns and wider European trade networks. Fire was a constant danger in crowded wooden towns. Regulations often required fireproofing measures, though major blazes still destroyed entire districts in minutes. Towns collected tolls and taxes from traders. These funds supported infrastructure projects like roads, bridges, and market halls, improving urban life and attracting more commerce. The merchant class grew in influence, using wealth to shape politics, fund churches, and sponsor public works, gradually challenging the dominance of traditional feudal elites. Education opportunities expanded in towns. Grammar schools, often linked to churches, taught Latin, arithmetic, and literacy, preparing boys for clerical work or trade management. Markets created diversity in diets. Urban residents enjoyed more variety in food, including fresh fish, imported fruits, and prepared goods sold by street vendors. Craft specialization allowed towns to become famous for certain products, like Norwich cloth or Sheffield knives, building reputations that attracted trade and skilled workers. Guild halls symbolized civic pride. These buildings hosted meetings, feasts, and important decisions, serving as both business centers and community gathering spaces. Paved streets appeared in wealthier towns, improving travel and cleanliness. However, many urban roads remained muddy and difficult to navigate, especially in wet seasons. Public punishment was common, intended to deter crime. Stocks, pillories, and whipping posts were set in market squares for maximum visibility and shame. Women in towns worked as brewers, seamstresses, and shopkeepers. Though guild membership was rare for them, some inherited businesses and managed them successfully. The Black Death changed urban demographics drastically, killing large numbers and creating labor shortages, which sometimes improved wages and opportunities for survivors. Town walls offered protection from raids and symbolized autonomy. Gates controlled access, allowing toll collection and defense against both military threats and petty criminals. Markets operated under strict regulation. Weights, measures, and prices were monitored to ensure fairness, protecting buyers and sellers alike from dishonest practices. Urban entertainment included minstrels, jugglers, and mystery plays performed in public spaces, bringing joy and culture to townsfolk of all classes. Merchants formed overseas connections, trading English wool and tin for goods from the Low Countries, France, and Italy, integrating England into the medieval global economy.